I still remember the night my life changed, though. At the time, it felt like the same endless cycle of exhaustion and disappointment. My name is Sarah Evans. I was 26 years old, broke, and barely hanging on. Most nights I pedaled through the city with numb legs and an empty stomach, delivering food to people who would never know my name, much less care about the girl behind the insulated bag. I told myself it was temporary, just a way to pay rent, but deep down, I knew I was running from something bigger. My failures, my unfinished dreams, the choices I made that kept me small when once I'd wanted so much more. That evening, the streets were slick with rain, the kind that stung my cheeks and blurred the neon lights into smeared streaks of color. My shift was almost over, and all I wanted was to get home, peel off my wet shoes, and sleep for 12 hours. But one last order came through an expensive law firm uptown, the kind of place where people wore suits worth more than my monthly rent. My heart sank. Of course. Fate loved sending me into places where I didn't belong, just to remind me of how far I'd fallen. I pushed harder on the pedals, muttering under my breath, weaving around traffic and distracted pedestrians. By the time I slipped into the towering glass building, my hair clung to my face, and I felt like an intruder in someone else's world. The marble floor gleamed so brightly it hurt my eyes. Even the receptionist looked like she belonged in a perfume commercial. I tried not to shrink under her gaze as I hurried to the elevator. That's when it happened. The doors slid open and a group of lawyers crowded in, clutching thick folders, muttering about million-dollar contracts as if the world spun only for them. I squeezed in just before the doors closed, hugging my delivery bag to my chest like a shield. And then one more man stepped in. He wore a flawless suit, his hair styled to perfection, his presence commanding without effort. The elevator beeped in protest. We'd exceeded the weight limit. "Someone has to step out," one lawyer said, eyes darting between us. I didn't even think before pointing at him, the perfect man in the perfect suit. He was the last one in. He should leave. The air went still. He arched an eyebrow as if no one had dared speak to him like that in years. "Me?" His voice was smooth calm but edged with disbelief. "Yes," I shot back, my cheeks burning. Basic line etiquette, last in first out. The lawyers shifted uncomfortably. I could feel their silent disapproval crawling up my skin, but I refused to back down. "My delivery matters just as much as your meeting," I added, my chin lifting stubbornly. And then someone whispered his name, Nicholas Smith, CEO of the firm. My stomach dropped, but my pride didn't let me falter. I stared straight at him. "CEOs can wait too." For a moment, his lips curled into the faintest smile. "You've got guts," he said softly. And somehow it didn't feel like an insult. When we reached the top floor and the lawyers poured out, I was shaking inside, though I refused to let it show. I delivered the order, praying I'd never see him again. But life or karma or some cruel god of irony had other plans. Because when I checked the receipt, the food was for him. For Nicholas Smith. I braced myself as I knocked on his office door. He looked up, his expression flickering with recognition. "You again?" he said, amused. I forced a smile, though my throat was tight. Life's little ironies. "Here's your food, Mr. CEO, who doesn't like waiting for elevators." I dropped the bag on his desk with more force than necessary. He studied me for a moment as if I were a puzzle he wanted to solve. "You're quick-witted, bold. Have you ever thought about doing something other than delivery?" His question stung, because once I had dreamed of more. I had studied law, poured my heart into it, but life ripped that dream away before I could finish. I didn't tell him that. I just shrugged, pretending I didn't care. But Nicholas didn't let it go. He scribbled a scenario on a piece of paper, slid it across his desk, and asked me how I'd defend it in court. I wanted to laugh in his face, tell him I wasn't his game, but the words spilled out anyway, the right words, sharp and precise. His eyes lit up as if I had just passed a secret test. "Come to my office tomorrow," he said, sliding me his card. "I'm offering you a chance." I walked out without replying, clutching that card like it was a lottery ticket. And that night, lying awake in the darkness of my tiny apartment, I hated myself for even considering it. Because chances like that didn't come to girls like me. They came to people who hadn't already failed, people who hadn't already quit. Still, the next morning, I found myself standing in front of his office again, my heart pounding like a drum I couldn't silence. Nicholas didn't look surprised when I walked in. He sat behind a desk so polished I could see my reflection in it, the skyline sprawling out behind him like a conquered kingdom. He gestured to the chair across from him, his eyes steady, curious, assessing. I hesitated before sitting, clutching my bag in my lap like a shield. Most people would have thrown this away, he said, lifting the business card I had crumpled and smoothed a dozen times last night. But you came back. I swallowed hard. Maybe I just wanted to see if you're always this arrogant. He smiled faintly, but there was something sharper underneath. Or maybe you're smart enough to recognize when opportunity knocks. I hated how his words landed in me, stirring up the old ache I had buried. Once I had dreamed of sitting in an office like this, of arguing cases, of proving myself in court. I had been a law student with fire in my veins. But tuition bills, family debt, and life's cruel timing had stolen that from me, leaving me peddling food deliveries to survive. I don't belong here, I muttered more to myself than to him. Nicholas leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Prove it. Or prove me wrong. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were pages of contracts, legal jargon, and a scenario that could have tied my brain in knots if I hadn't once trained to unravel them. My fingers trembled as I turned the pages. Old instincts kicking in, the part of me I thought had died suddenly sparking awake. I outlined my defense strategy aloud, my voice shaking at first, then steadier as the pieces fell together. When I finished, silence filled the room. Nicholas leaned back, his gaze fixed on me with something I couldn't name. Admiration? Curiosity? Or was I just another investment to him? Another puzzle to exploit? You're wasted delivering takeout, he said finally. Work for me. I'll pay you double what you make now, triple if you can keep surprising me. My heart slammed against my ribs. It was tempting, impossibly tempting. But trust wasn't something I gave easily anymore. I remembered the professors who said I'd never last in law, the classmates who mocked my secondhand clothes, the ex-boyfriend who left when I couldn't keep up with his ambitions. Everyone underestimated me, and maybe Nicholas was no different. Why me? I asked quietly. Because you don't flinch, he said simply. Not in an elevator full of lawyers, not when I tested you. That makes you dangerous. And in my world, dangerous is valuable. I walked out of his office that day with a new job, though I wasn't sure if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. The weeks that followed were a blur. Nicholas threw me into case files, negotiations, situations that would have terrified me if I had time to think. But I didn't. I swam because sinking wasn't an option. And every time I pulled through, his eyes lingered on me a little longer, as if I were proving something not just to him, but to myself. Still late at night in my tiny apartment, I wrestled with doubts. Was I just a novelty to him? A delivery girl turned makeshift legal mind? Or was I actually clawing my way back to the life I had once wanted? Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at the skyline, whispering to the city like it might answer. Do I deserve this? Then came the night that changed everything. Nicholas called me into his office well past midnight. The city lights burned behind him, his suit jacket draped carelessly over the chair. He looked tired. Human in a way I hadn't seen before. They're trying to take everything he said, handing me a file. Competitors, sharks. And if I lose this case, I lose more than money. I lose the company. I skimmed the file, my pulse quickening. The case was brutal, layered with traps, loopholes, sabotage. No one in their right mind would put this in the hands of someone like me. But Nicholas did. His eyes searched mine, not as a CEO testing an employee, but as a man reaching for someone he trusted. You're the only one I believe can see through this, he said quietly. I should have laughed. I should have reminded him I was just a delivery girl who'd stumbled into his world by accident. But instead something rose in me, anger, defiance, pride. I was tired of being underestimated, tired of being told I wasn't enough. So I looked him in the eye and said, then let's win. For the first time in years I felt alive. The weeks that followed felt like a war. My days blurred into endless stacks of documents, contracts littered with traps, and late nights fueled by cheap coffee that stained my teeth and burned my stomach. I practically lived inside Nicholas's office, surrounded by papers and whiteboards scrawled with arguments, counter-arguments, and tiny glimmers of strategies that might save us. Nicholas was always there, pacing like a lion in a cage, his mind moving 1,000 miles a minute. Sometimes we argued heated, sharp words thrown like daggers across the room. He accused me of being reckless. I accused him of not trusting me enough. But underneath the friction was something else, something dangerous, a growing respect, a pull neither of us wanted to name. One night, when the exhaustion had stripped away our defenses, I caught him staring at me. Not the way he looked at colleagues or investors, but softer, more curious, as if he were trying to read a language he'd never seen before. "Why did you quit law school?" he asked suddenly, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I froze, my throat tightened. I wanted to tell him it was none of his business, but the truth spilled out anyway, raw and jagged. Because I couldn't afford it. Because my mother's medical bills swallowed everything. Because life doesn't wait for your dreams to catch up. He didn't respond right away. He just sat there, his jaw tense, his eyes darker than usual. Finally, he said, "Then the system lost someone brilliant." It was the first time anyone had ever called me brilliant, without a trace of condescension. I should have brushed it off, but instead I carried those words like a secret flame inside me. As the court date approached, the pressure became unbearable. The opposition was ruthless, armed with an army of lawyers who had more resources, more time, more everything. Whispers spread through the firm that Nicholas was finished, that he was a fool to pin his hopes on me. I pretended not to hear, but every word cut deep. The night before trial, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by pages and pages of notes, my head in my hands. Doubt clawed at me. What if they're right? What if I lose and everyone sees me for what I really am? Just a delivery girl who got lucky. My phone buzzed. A message from Nicholas. "Don't let them make you smaller than you are." I stared at the words for a long time, my chest tightening. He believed in me more than I believed in myself. The morning of the trial, I walked into that courtroom trembling but unbroken. The air buzzed with whispers, reporters scribbling furiously, the opposition smirking with confidence. I felt their eyes on me, doubting, mocking. But then Nicholas leaned close, his voice low enough only I could hear. "Show them who you really are." And when I stood to speak, something inside me shifted. My voice rang out steady, sharper with each word. I dismantled their arguments one by one, exposing loopholes, pointing out contradictions, weaving the story of truth with the precision I'd once thought I'd lost forever. For the first time, the room wasn't laughing at me, they were listening. The opposing lawyer sneered, but his confidence cracked. The judge's eyes sharpened with interest. Every objection thrown my way became another chance to prove I wasn't just surviving here, I belonged here. By the end of the day, I was drenched in sweat, my throat raw, but I could feel it, the tide had turned. When court adjourned, Nicholas squeezed my shoulder, his hand lingering a second too long. "You were extraordinary," he murmured. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe it. But victories don't come without cost. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I caught sight of myself in the mirror, eyes hollow, body slumped. The fire inside me burned, but it also consumed. I whispered into the darkness, "Who am I becoming?" Because somewhere in the chaos of saving his empire, I realized I was saving myself too. And that terrified me more than the trial ever could. The verdict came weeks later, though it felt like a lifetime. Every day leading up to it was a torment, my chest tight with dread, my mind replaying every word I had spoken in that courtroom. I tried to act strong, to keep my chin high, as the world watched Nicholas's empire dangle on the edge of a blade. But when I lay awake at night, the truth gnawed at me, one wrong argument, one overlooked detail, and I could destroy not only him, but myself. The courthouse was packed that morning, the kind of crowd that smells blood in the water. Reporters lined the steps, cameras flashing, pens poised. Inside, the air was suffocating, thick with judgment and greed. The judge's voice carried through the silence, measured and deliberate. And then, with a finality that made my stomach lurch, the words came down in our favor. We had won. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The sound of gasps, scattered applause, and Nicholas exhaling sharply all blurred together. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the table, staring straight ahead, as if I didn't dare move, afraid I'd shatter the fragile reality around me. Then Nicholas's hand found mine under the table, firm, grounding, unmistakably real. "You saved everything," he whispered. His eyes were fierce, shining with something I couldn't quite name. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper, something dangerous. That night, the celebration was lavish as only Nicholas could orchestrate. Champagne flowed, glasses clinked, laughter echoed off marble walls. Everyone wanted a piece of him, the investors, the partners, the socialites who had once predicted his downfall. But his eyes kept straying to me across the crowded room like a thread tethering us in a space full of noise. When the party thinned out, he found me on the balcony, the city lights stretched endlessly below, the air cool against my skin. I felt raw, stripped bare, my body exhausted, but my heart still racing. "You don't belong on the sidelines," he said quietly. Standing so close, I could feel the warmth radiating off him. "You were born for this." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Born for what? Delivering food until someone decides I'm worth more." "No!" His voice hardened, cutting through the night air. "Born to fight. Born to lead. Born to prove them all wrong." The silence stretched between us, heavy with words unsaid. My heart pounded so loud I thought he could hear it. And then he reached for my hand. The touch was careful, hesitant, as if he knew the fire it could ignite. I should have pulled away. He was my boss, my savior, the man who had thrust me back into a world I'd abandoned. But in that moment, I was no longer the delivery girl he had underestimated. I was the woman who had stood in court and turned the tide. And he looked at me like I was something rare, something untouchable. When his lips brushed mine, it wasn't gentle. It was desperate, electric, filled with everything we had buried beneath professionalism and pride. My knees went weak, my chest ached, and for a second I let myself fall. But when I pulled back, breathless reality crashed in. "This is wrong," I whispered, though the tremor in my voice betrayed me. He studied me, his jaw tight, his eyes conflicted. "Maybe. Or maybe it's the only thing that's ever felt right." I turned away, staring at the city like it might offer answers. My heart was a storm I couldn't control. I wanted him, feared him, resented him all at once. And beneath it all, a whisper of doubt haunted me. Was this about love or power? Because I knew how stories like this ended. And I wasn't sure I was ready to find out which one we were living. The days after that night felt like walking a tightrope stretched over fire. Every glance, every accidental brush of his hand in the office carried a weight that neither of us dared to name out loud. The firm buzzed with gossip about the victory, about Nicholas's brilliance in securing it, but I knew the truth. I knew it had been my words, my strategies, my sleepless nights that had turned the tide. And yet the recognition was his. Always his. Part of me didn't care. I told myself that being invisible was safer, that letting him take the spotlight protected me from scrutiny. But another part, the part that had found her voice again in that courtroom, burned with resentment. I was tired of being underestimated. Tired of being the secret weapon no one was allowed to see. One evening, as the office emptied out, I confronted him. "You let them think it was all you," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Nicholas leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Perception matters. To the board, to the investors. They need to see strength, not surprise. Not a delivery girl who outsmarted them all," I finished bitterly. His eyes flickered, and for once he didn't have a quick reply. The silence stretched until I couldn't bear it. I grabbed my bag and turned to leave. But before I reached the door, his voice stopped me. "Sarah." I froze. He almost never said my name. "You think I don't see you," he said quietly. "But I do. More than you know." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But doubt gnawed at me, whispering that I was still just a tool to him, a gamble that had paid off. And yet that night, lying awake in my bed, the memory of his voice saying my name echoed like a confession I couldn't forget. Then the storm hit. News broke of another lawsuit, bigger, dirtier, designed not just to destroy Nicholas's company, but to humiliate him personally. The media pounced headlines screaming that his reign was crumbling, that the last victory had been a fluke. Investors panicked, the board whispered mutiny, and once again he turned to me. "This is different," he admitted, pacing his office like a caged animal. "They don't just want money. They want blood. They want me ruined." I flipped through the file, my stomach sinking. They had evidence, at least it looked like evidence, that could paint Nicholas as corrupt. Documents, testimonies, photos. It was damning, too damning, unless... "This was planted," I said, slowly piecing it together. "They want you to panic, to settle, to crawl away in disgrace. But if we can prove fabrication. Nicholas stopped, pacing his eyes on me like a drowning man seeing a lifeline. Can you? I hesitated, my pulse racing. If I'm right, yes. But if I'm wrong, then I lose everything anyway, he finished grimly. So we fought again. Long nights blurred into mornings. Coffee turned to whiskey. Arguments turned to near whispers as exhaustion stripped us bare. I caught him watching me sometimes, not with the intensity of a CEO guarding his empire, but with the fragile awe of a man realizing he wasn't alone. And in those moments, something inside me cracked. Because I wasn't just fighting for him anymore. I was fighting for us, for whatever fragile, forbidden thing was blooming between the cracks of strategy and survival. The trial loomed like a storm cloud, darker and heavier than the last. The world wanted him destroyed, and I was the only one standing in their way. But deep down, a question clawed at me when the dust settled. Would Nicholas see me as his equal? Or just the girl who saved him? The courtroom was colder this time, not in temperature, but in spirit. Reporters packed the benches, their pens poised like knives hungry for blood. The opposition's lawyers strutted in with smug smiles, certain this would be the end of Nicholas Smith. And there I was, standing at the defense table, my knees threatening to buckle under the weight of a war that wasn't supposed to be mine. Nicholas sat beside me, uncharacteristically quiet. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed forward, but I could feel the tension radiating off him. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about reputation, about legacy, about his very name. And somehow, impossibly, I had become the shield standing between him and ruin. As the trial began, the prosecution unveiled their so-called evidence with dramatic flair emails that painted Nicholas as manipulative documents, suggesting fraud photographs that seemed too convenient to be real. The crowd whispered, the judge frowned, and for a moment doubt coiled around my throat like a rope. What if I'm wrong? What if I can't prove this? Then Nicholas leaned closer, his voice barely audible. I trust you. 3 words, that's all. But they snapped me out of my spiral. For once, someone wasn't doubting me, wasn't reminding me of my failures. He trusted me, and I refused to let him down. I rose to my feet, my palms slick with sweat. My voice shook at first, but as I tore into the evidence, something steadied me. The emails had inconsistencies, phrases Nicholas never used, timestamps that didn't align. The documents bore signatures that trembled unnaturally as if copied by hand. The photographs contained shadows that didn't match the angle of the light. Piece by piece, I ripped apart the facade they had built, exposing the lies thread by thread. The opposing lawyer tried to interrupt, to sneer and undermine me, but I held my ground. Each objection only fueled me, sharpened me. For the first time, I wasn't the delivery girl, the dropout, the one who had wasted her potential. I was a legal mind in full command of the battlefield. And the battlefield listened. By the end of the day, the smirks had vanished from their faces. The judge leaned forward, intrigued. The jury's eyes had shifted, no longer bored, no longer skeptical, but intent, as if they sensed the tide turning. When the gavel finally struck to adjourn, I collapsed into my seat, trembling with adrenaline. Nicholas placed his hand over mine, firm and steady, anchoring me. He didn't say anything at first, he didn't have to. His silence carried more weight than any praise. But later, outside the courthouse, under the crush of flashing cameras and shouted questions, he finally leaned close, his voice low, meant only for me. You saved me again. I don't know how to thank you. I should have said it was my job. I should have brushed it off with professionalism. But instead, the truth slipped out raw and reckless. Then don't make me invisible. Don't let the world forget who stood by you. His eyes locked on mine, something fierce and unguarded sparking there. And for a moment, it felt like the world had fallen away, the reporters, the lawsuits, the weight of his empire. There was only him, and me, and the dangerous possibility of something more. But possibilities don't erase reality. That night, alone in my apartment, I stared at the ceiling, my chest tight. I knew the war wasn't over. More enemies would come, more battles would test us, and the line between partnership and something deeper was already beginning to blur. I whispered into the darkness as if the city might hear me. Am I fighting for him? Or for myself? The question hung in the air, heavy, unanswered. But deep down I knew the truth. It was both, always both. And that terrified me more than any trial ever could. The final day of trial arrived like the end of a storm, the sky outside gray and heavy, the courthouse buzzing with tension so thick it made my skin prickle. Every seat was filled, reporters elbowing for space cameras flashing like lightning in a war zone. Nicholas walked beside me, calm on the surface but taut with quiet rage, the kind that comes only when a man's very name is on the line. I felt the weight of every eye as I rose to give our closing argument. My heart hammered so loudly I thought it might drown out my words, but once I started, the fear melted into fire. I spoke of truth, of justice, of how fragile reputations could be destroyed by lies if we didn't guard them fiercely. I pointed to the cracks in the evidence, to the contradictions that screamed fabrication, to the simple fact that power makes enemies and enemies will do anything to bring you down. As I spoke, I caught sight of Nicholas watching me. Not with the eyes of a CEO guarding his empire, but with the eyes of a man who had finally been seen, finally defended not by money or influence, but by someone who believed in him. And for a fleeting, dangerous second, I felt like every word was not just for the jury, but for him. The courtroom held its breath as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. My fingers dug into the table nails, biting into wood. Nicholas's hand brushed mine under the surface, a silent anchor, and I clung to it as though it could hold back the tide. And then victory. The charges dismissed, the lies exposed. Nicholas Smith walked out, not just a free man, but vindicated. The reporters swarmed him, microphones thrust into his face, the air electric with chaos. But through it all, his gaze sought me, unwavering, steady, like I was the only truth in a sea of noise. That night there was no lavish celebration, no champagne, no crowds. Just the two of us in his office, the city lights sprawling below like a constellation of promises and regrets. The silence between us was heavy, fragile, charged. "You saved me," he said softly, almost as if he didn't want to admit it. I shook my head. "No, you saved me. You gave me back the part of myself I thought I'd lost." His jaw tightened, his eyes searching mine. "Sarah, do you have any idea what you've become? You're not the girl who walked in here with a delivery bag. You're the woman who tore down an empire's lies. You're—" He stopped as if the words were too dangerous to release. But I felt them anyway, hanging unspoken in the air. When he kissed me, it wasn't the reckless desperation of before. It was slow, deliberate, filled with the weight of battles fought side by side. I melted into it for one impossible moment, letting myself believe this could be love, not just victory. But when we pulled apart, reality crept in, like a shadow. Love in his world was never simple. Power corrodes, secrets linger, and I knew the enemies we had faced were only the beginning. In the days that followed, Nicholas offered me a permanent position, his partner-in-law in strategy, in everything. It was everything I had once dreamed of. And yet as I stood at my tiny apartment window, staring at the city that had both broken and remade me, a question echoed in my chest. Was I building a future? Or trading one cage for another? Because love tied to power is a dangerous thing. It saves you. It consumes you. It leaves you wondering who you'll become when the war is over. Still, I knew this much: I would never be invisible again. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Thank you for walking with me through this story. If it touched you, if it made you feel, if it made you reflect on your own choices, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more heartfelt stories and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were me?